Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is David Stankiewicz. I'm the event producer for the 2019 IEEE Women in Engineering International Leadership Conference virtual track. Today is our third session in the series, and we are going to talk about nonprofit boards and how to find a nonprofit board to join. And so I'm going to go ahead and first introduce our guest speaker for the day, who we're very lucky to be joined by Christina Qi. So let me tell you a little bit about Christina and then allow Christina to take things over and run with her presentation for the day, because we do have a lot of content to cover, and we're probably going to go almost a full hour today. So Christina Qi serves as the co-founder and the partner at Dome Yard LP, which is a hedge fund known for its focus on high-frequency trading. Christina leads the millennial revolution in the financial industry, founding Dome Yard back in her college days with just $1,000 in savings. Dome Yard closed its Series C in 2017 at trades up to $1 billion per day. And her company story has been featured on the front pages of Forbes and Nikkei and quoted in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNN, NBC, and the Financial Times. Wow. Christina is a contributor to the World Economic Forum's research on AI and finance. She brings experience in investment management, sales and trading, derivatives options, and technology across, get this, Goldman Sachs, UBS Securities, Zions Bank, and MIT Lincoln Labs. She is a visiting lecturer at MIT within Nobel laureate Robert Merton's retirement finance class since 2014, and she teaches her case on HFT at the Harvard Business School. I think most importantly, although her last name is only 2 letters long, it's worth 11 points in the game of Scrabble. And so, Christina, thank you so much for being with us today. I just want to tell everyone in the audience how to participate before we get started. So everyone who's joined us, we do have a chat window on the right. We want to make the session today interactive, and Christina's going to take your questions as they come in throughout the day. So use the chat window on the right to communicate with us and or ask a question. Also, use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and you can put your question in there for Christina, and then you can upvote your favorite questions. So you want to see the best questions asked rise to the top, and Christina will take as many questions as she can at the end of her presentation. Okay, enough from me. Christina, I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'm going to let you pull up your slide deck, and you're going to take it away. So yeah. Christina, over to you.
Yay. Okay. Thank you so much, David, for the introduction. That was super kind of you. So I'm just going to jump right into my presentation. It is very content heavy. So hopefully if you have any issues with the presentation, definitely please message me or the organizer, and we can try to figure it out. But anyway, I'm here to talk not about myself, but about how to help you guys, learn more about nonprofit boards and also join a nonprofit board. So I'm actually going to share my presentation screen with you guys right now in a Chrome tab. So here we go. I'm pulling this up right now. And so you guys should see my presentation. I am screen sharing. Okay, great. So basically, yeah, this presentation is about finding the perfect nonprofit board opportunity. It is geared a little bit more towards women. I think this group, the people who register, is about 90% women. So it is a little bit geared towards women, but men and women are welcome in this presentation. And I will definitely answer questions from everybody. So, okay, let's move on. Just a quick disclaimer from my company, actually, don't buy or sell anything. We're a hedge fund, so don't buy or sell anything. And if you lose any money, it's not my fault. That's basically what that says. So a brief, overview of the agenda. We're going to talk just a little bit about me, and then what is a nonprofit board? How do I find a nonprofit board position? Some interview tips and red flags to look for in nonprofits, and some resources that people can look up as well. And then we'll do a little bit of time for Q&A. But keep in mind, this is extremely content heavy. I have a ton of information. So just a really quick presentation, a really quick bit about me. Just some other background you guys probably might not know about. I grew up in Chinese restaurants. My parents waited tables after school, and I was an only child. I didn't have a babysitter, so that was my kind of childhood in Utah. I started my company while in college, and it is we call it a quant hedge fund and kind of like a fintech company. And you can learn a little bit more about me if you want to connect afterwards. My LinkedIn is right there. So if you just search my name, you'll probably find me. So in terms of nonprofit board experience, I have experiences here and there. I did want to mention these four. And the reason why is because I will mention each one later on in the presentation and how I got each one, so you can see kind of what each one entails, as well as how much do you have to donate, how did you get each one, those questions that people always ask. So some of these are big organizations. So 100 Women in Finance has 15,000 members, whereas Invest in Girls is a lot smaller. We impact about 3,000 girls per year. So anyways, it's like the whole gamut of different experiences, and I'll talk about each one. And then this is just some photos of our company in case people are curious kind of what kind of environment we work in. We're based in Boston, and our name does come from two universities down up the river, I guess, from us. So I guess, why am I here? I'm actually, we're not advertising any services. Yay. I'm just giving back to my community. I'm just sharing the world of board service with you because I want to, and because I think it's my responsibility to. And I think everyone deserves a chance to make a difference, to volunteer, to have a bigger role, in the nonprofit sector, even while you're, no matter how old or young you are, and no matter what stage you are in your career. I think it's never too late and never too early to, start looking for volunteer and nonprofit roles. So yay, let's move on. So here's why the context of kind of how I decided on joining a board and, why it became important to me. So what happened was, I had graduated from college, and a few years after college, I met a friend and through my, school alumni events. And one of these events, I was talking to one of my friends, and I said, oh, yeah, I love going to these events. I love volunteering at these, sometimes I volunteer. I help do check names. I help do things like that. My friend's like, oh, well, I'm on the board of this organization, so why not just join the board? And I was like, what do you mean join the board? Like, I'm too young for that. I don't have any experience, And he's like, no, you're already volunteering. You might as well take a bigger role in a position, and hopefully, instead of just, checking name tags all day, you can also decide on things like budgeting and how to, go through like really tough decisions with the board and things like that. And I was like, oh, that might be interesting. So anyway, I realized, I had a lot of male friends, especially, who were on boards, and I wasn't on any. And I was like, oh, maybe I should take a look and see what that means. So, when people think about nonprofit boards, I think the biggest impression is like, you imagine a room of all kind of, white male folks of much older age. And that is true for some boards, and that's how I pictured it initially in my head. I thought, oh, I don't look like a board member. I'm not qualified to join a board. I'm not old enough. But in reality, actually, here's one of the boards I'm on. Not all boards look the same. There are boards with, both younger and older folks on the board, and there are women who can join boards and who are on boards too. So it is very much, very diverse depending on which types of boards you join, and they're not all the same. So you can join a board too. Here's one of the boards I'm on. You notice, it's great. There's diversity in gender, race, age, and industry. There's people from healthcare, technology, finance, etc. On this. This is the MIT Sloan Boston board. So, it's fantastic that it's just so diverse, and I feel welcome. So anyway, boards can look like all different shapes and sizes. So some of the common misconceptions that people kind of face, I think, is I initially thought, like, in order to join a board, I need to be retired. I need to, have $1 million, to have X years of experience, and I need to be, senior level at work, whatever that means. I need to somehow be qualified, to join. And I realized, okay, a lot of these, it just isn't true anymore, especially these days when people want to give back at an earlier stage in their careers. So those are some very common misconceptions. In reality, boards seek a diversity, in multiple dimensions, actually. A lot of boards actively seek, gender, age, and generation diversity, racial diversity, cultural diversity, and, diversity in background. And so all of those things do factor in, and a lot of boards do care a lot more. So then the last slide on this one, it just says you can join a board. So, no matter where you're from, what your background is, it's definitely possible to join a nonprofit board. And I will now go through some of the more, technical-ish slides where how to join a nonprofit board. So what is a nonprofit board first? Just to give you a high-level overview. So nonprofit board is the governing body of a nonprofit organization. Usually these boards help with fundraising, with events, initiatives, program development, hiring, things like that. Some of these boards, it varies. They can have weekly meetings, monthly meetings, or annual meetings, depending on which organization you're part of. So I'm a part of boards that do all three. So for instance, I'm a part of MIT's Board of Trustees. They do one annual meeting and that's it. I'm also on, a board of, I mentioned Invest in Girls, which is a smaller nonprofit. For that role, we actually do weekly calls. So, each kind of position varies depending on which board you're on. You could be placed on a committee within a board, or sometimes the boards don't have committees. It just depends on, the organization again. There might be a term limit and there might not be. So some of the terms usually can be 2 to 3 years is usually the standard term that we see for these boards. And then sometimes there just isn't a limit. It just seems like it just goes on forever. And then there might be what's called a give or get. You might hear about that. Sometimes it's basically people will ask you, can you please donate, in order to keep your position on the board. And we call that a give or get in our industry. And I'll talk more about that later because there's a lot of misconceptions about the give or get. So, okay, in terms of the benefits now, I think, Jason asked a really great question earlier, actually before the presentation about, what are the impacts or what's the benefit of joining a board outside of, working and your day job. And so, for me, the biggest benefits are definitely like making an impact on a cause that you care about. I work in the financial industry and it does get sometimes pretty monotonous, but I love how after work I can go and teach finance to high school girls, teaching finance to college-aged students all over the world. I think that's a huge, it's just something I care about. It's also kind of a unique learning experience. You get to work with a team that's outside of your, people you never would have gotten to meet otherwise. Teams of people who work in different industries and are different stages in their lives. You also get to increase your network. Obviously it adds value to your resume as well. And you get to have your voice, heard in a different way. And so those are some of the really unique benefits, I think, of, joining. And also, if you guys have any questions, feel free to, continue asking. I can either answer during the presentation when I hit the a relevant slide, or I'll answer afterwards. So, sometimes I think knowing the terminology of joining a board it makes a huge difference. I know there's people from all over the world, so I'm only going to say the English terminology. I hope that's okay, but I encourage you guys to look up your own local language's terminology because it helps when you're interviewing for these positions. So most boards, I told you, they have these committees on their boards. And so a lot of times we call these standing committees. And so I'm going to name the different committees and what they're called in the US. So the biggest committee, the most popular one that people say, it's called the Development Committee. And that's the committee that's responsible for fundraising, for galas, corporate partnerships, things like that. So I'm a part of a lot of development committees because my day job is also doing a lot of fundraising for my company. There's another committee called Programming, which you may have heard of, which is refining kind of the curriculum portion of a nonprofit. So if, for instance, if the nonprofit is teaching maybe like financial literacy concepts to high school girls, then programming would be, let's refine that. Let's work on refining that curriculum, making it relevant and making sure that the program is a success and can reach many different schools or universities, around the country or around the world. So That's programming. And then there's a committee called NomGov, which stands for Nomination and Governance. NomGov committees are basically like the HR of the board. So they're responsible for recruiting new members, finding potential board members who can join, and just making sure that the board itself is well balanced and everyone's contributing and making a difference on the board. There's the finance and marketing committees sometimes of a board. Not all boards have these, but they might not have all these committees or none at all. But those are pretty straightforward. Responsible for doing some of the finance and the audit and the marketing work of those committees. And then there might be some ad hoc committees as well. They might have working groups or volunteer groups or task forces. So it's kind of all over the place. But in general, I think the most popular committees you'll see are development, programming, and NomGov in general, sometimes like finance as well. Okay. So in the US, nonprofits are required to have officers, actually. So they're required to have a president, a treasurer, a secretary, as well as sometimes they'll have various VPs, assistant treasurers, assistant secretaries, etc. A lot of it just depends. It's actually dependent on state law, not national law. So different states have different rules on what their nonprofits must look like in terms of composition. So a lot of these boards will have, an official president in charge. You might be able to even look up some other filings and see kind of, who's on the charter and, who's responsible for what on the board. So here's a really important topic that a lot of people ask me about, which is the give or get, which is basically you have to agree to donate a certain minimum or raise it from sponsors or both. And this is usually on an annual basis. So what I mean by that is, for instance, Boston Ballet, if you go to the example at the very bottom here, Boston Ballet, they have multiple tiers of give or gets, which is great. I think a lot of large boards these days are adopting this kind of tiered system. And that way it allows for anyone to participate on the board. So Boston Ballet's highest tier is called the Board of Trustees. And that's a $25,000 give or get. That's usually what we think of when we think of joining a board. You need $25,000 per year. But then there's different tiers. So then there's the Board of Overseers, which is a $5,000 annual commitment. That's a lot less. And then there's the example. This is my example. This is the part that I'm a part of with Boston Ballet, which is the Young Partners, and that's $250 per year. Super inexpensive, considering it's a nonprofit board, and you get to still participate in a lot of their events, a lot of their meetings, and get a voice in terms of how they can grow and what they're looking for. How can they launch more studios? How can they plan out their future events and make them a success? So it's really nice because a lot of these boards have such different tiers for you in different stages of your career. So definitely, I'd recommend, sometimes this information isn't public, by the way, so you might not be able to see this information on Boston Ballet's website. So you sometimes just have to contact them and just ask, what are the tiers of membership? Can you send me your brochure? And then go from there. So, and I'll talk about how to find these positions as well. So moving on, so there's big and small boards, and there's a huge difference, just like big and small companies. There's a huge difference between, being on a big board and a small board. There's a difference in meeting frequency, the impact that you're making. On a small board, you're going to make hopefully a much larger impact. Whereas on a big board, like I'm on the board of MIT, and I don't think I've really made, that big of an impact at the end of the day compared to all the other board members on the board. Whereas the smaller boards, you really feel like you have to, work really hard, and you're in charge of a lot of different things. So there's a difference in structure, in seniority. Some, big boards will have different layers of seniority, whereas smaller boards may not have any committees at all. And there's pros and cons to both. So definitely, I would weigh the pros and cons of this and see kind of, what you prefer for yourself. So anyway, I'm going to move on to the next section here, which is how do I find board positions? So, in terms of when you're doing your board search, it's mainly about attending events and referrals. And I put no wonder it's mostly men, because it's just true. The fact is that, most boards these days, it's just mostly guys on boards. And that's because a lot of times guys tend to refer other guys. So it's funny because in my career, in my industry, I've seen fathers refer their sons to boards, but I rarely see mothers refer their daughters, just because there are very few mothers to begin with on the boards, I guess. So it's about attending events and doing referrals. And what that means is going to industry events, talking to people, asking about like, hey, what boards are you serving on? What are, is there anything that might be interesting? And if they're on a board that might be interesting to you, what they can do is introduce you and say, hey, I'll introduce you to our director, and then we can go from there. So sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, hey, I'm interested in, a big example is Invest in Girls, which is one of the boards I'm on. And I'll say, yeah, if you're interested, let me know. I'll introduce you to, the chair and the directors of the board. And then you guys can start having start your conversations there and kind of see what happens. So you can also ask acquaintances, do some Google searches as well yourself to start reaching out to people on LinkedIn if you see that they're in a relevant board position. There are some board match companies, but some of these companies are for profit actually. So I actually would deter you from doing that unless you're like super desperate and you have the money to kind of pay for something like that. So in general, it's kind of a strange process. It's not like you can't just go on like Indeed or on to LinkedIn Jobs, and look around. Usually they don't post on those job posting websites. So you just have to look around your network organically and just kind of find those right opportunities. So there's two approaches you can do to finding a board position. So there's a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. So the bottom-up approach, you write down 2 to 4 causes you care about. So for instance, women's rights, education, arts, sports, whatever it may be that you personally, that you care about. And then list some areas that you can contribute to. So whether that's, accounting or fundraising, legal, curriculum, things that, given your unique background, you think you might be able to contribute to. And then you think about, okay, how much can I give and how much can I get? How much can I raise every year? So I do apologize. I realized I forgot to mention during the give get, it's not just a donation. You can also raise that amount as well. So for instance, at the $25,000 level, some people do actually raise $25,000, maybe from their day job company. If they work at a large accounting firm, it's very easy for the accounting firm to sponsor at $25,000 a year. Then they don't have to give, they don't have to write a check from their own pocket. So that's why it's called the give or get, because sometimes you can go out there, do some fundraising from other companies, raise, let's say $5,000, and have a mix of maybe you donate $5,000 and maybe you raise $5,000. So that's the important thing as well, is you don't have to necessarily donate, although it's encouraged. You can also raise from external companies out there as well. And then there's a top-down approach, which is basically, thinking about organizations that you were maybe a member of when you were growing up. So thinking about your university, or think about maybe, like for me, I was in the Boys and Girls Club growing up. Maybe you have a CFA. If you're in finance, you might have a CPA, a CFA, or some other kind of certification. And sometimes they have a nonprofit arm like CFA Society, Kaya Foundation. There's a lot of nonprofits, that are affiliated with a lot of these organizations. And so thinking about what you were a member of growing up and, thinking about, would you want to give back to those organizations at some point? You can also just look around, think about nonprofits you might like. So I'm in Boston, so I put Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Museum of Fine Arts here, like organizations that I love and I attend, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe I can contribute, on a higher level. And then you can kind of narrow down that list as well and go through it that way. So, you can take both approaches, or just do both and see kind of where your list gets narrowed down to, and then try to find folks going to their events or going on LinkedIn and trying to see who who might be part of those boards. So I wanted to talk a little bit more personally about how I found these board positions, so it gives you a sense of some of the things that you could do as well, since telling stories I think is super helpful. So for the MIT Sloan one, what I did was I attended some of their events. I eventually met the president of the board randomly at one of their events, and he was like, I think what happened was he invited me to a dinner that they were hosting, and I showed up at the dinner, And it turned out everyone was dressed really formally. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was a board, pretty much a board vetting event where they were trying to vouch for and see basically an interview. It was a dinner interview, which I didn't know about until I showed up. And then it was like, oh, and afterwards, apparently I did decent enough that they asked me to join the board. The 100 Women in Finance board position, I attended a bunch of their events. It's like a professional organization for women, so I attended a lot of their events. Eventually, at one of their events, I met a committee member one day, and that committee member was like, "Yeah, would you want to join our committee? Like, we do a lot of great events, and you can definitely help us, organize some events." And I was like, "Sure, why not?" So that was that, and then Invest in Girls was kind of a strange one, actually. So for my birthday, I did a Facebook fundraiser. For birthdays, you want to do I want to, donate back to charity. So I did a birthday fundraiser. And I guess I raised enough funds that they noticed and they were like, that is really cool. And would you be interested in learning more about us? And so I had a bunch of coffee chats with some of their board members and really fell in love with the organization and told them I want to be on the board. And so then they, we went through the board vetting process and then I joined. And then there's a company called Boston Ballet, where I'm a part of that, the Young Partners event. And so through 100 Women, actually, there was a private event that we did together, and that was how I found the position. Was through there. They sent us their brochures afterwards. I took a look and I said, I can't join at the $25,000 level. I can join at the $250 level. And so that was basically how I joined that organization. And so in terms of how much do I donate, that's a really great question. The give-get question. So for Sloan, there's actually no give or get, surprisingly, but everybody on the board is highly encouraged to find sponsors because all the events are kind of done for free. So we need to have sponsors to offer to pay for the food and the office space and things like that. So, sometimes there's no give or get. 100 Women, there's also no give or get on my committee. Invest in Girls, there's a $10,000 annual give or get. So I'm required every year to either raise $10,000 from our various sponsors in Boston, or to donate $10,000, or do a combination. Maybe I'll raise $5,000 and donate $5,000 personally. Boston Ballet, it is a $250 annual donation for that Young Partners program. So you can see it is such a wide variety of different types of give or gets. It's all over the place. And you probably notice the other thing is that you don't need to be a billionaire to be on the board. I think that's also super empowering and really cool. So it's kind of all over the place. I highly recommend just looking around and seeing what you find. For me, it's been the most meaningful experience of my life is being on these boards and helping out, volunteering at all of these events and helping organize some events for the community like this. It can get stressful sometimes, but for me, so long as these positions give me more energy at the end of the day, then I think it's totally worth it and I love it. So, my hope is that it gives you more energy to go about your day. For me, it does. Some of these board positions, my work gets stressful. And so when I do these volunteering positions, then I'm like, oh my gosh, this is why I work. This is why I wake up in the morning, it gives me a lot more energy. So anyway, I'm going to talk about interview tips and red flags for boards because it's different than interviewing for a regular job. So interviewing for a board is kind of strange. It does vary a lot in format. You may be invited to a secret dinner like I did, or you may have a formal interview or an informal coffee chat. It could be kind of anything. Some of these boards, they'll bring me through 4 or 5 coffee chats with at a Starbucks or something with various board members at different times, and then afterwards they'll probably fill in an interview form and maybe rank how I did or whatever. You might have interviews disguised as different events where they're secretly interviewing people, but they don't tell you because they don't want you to worry too much or think too much about it. And then at the board meeting they'll have an official vote for kind of who they want on the board, and then they'll kind of go from there. So here's some questions that you might receive. Obviously they'll ask you to describe your background. Why do you want to join the board? What does our cause mean to you? How can you contribute? And what can you contribute? So time, how much time do you have? Sometimes it's good if you're transitioning from job to job, maybe, hopefully that means more time. I don't know, but, it could be time, money, skills, network, things like that. What committees are you interested in? So that's when the terminology is really important. You need to know, do you want to join the development committee? Do you want to join programming? What other commitments and board seats do you have? Because if sometimes some people, we call it overboarded. If you are serving on like way too many boards, maybe it's not best time to, join a new one, especially a smaller one where they need you more. So they might ask, what other commitments do you have? It's okay if it's your first board position ever. Sometimes it's viewed as a good thing because that means you can contribute more time and you're going to be a lot more invested, a lot more energetic about these positions. And then they'll ask you like, where are you going to be in the next couple of years? And the reason why that's important is if you move, if you change jobs or if you are, reach a different patch in your career where you might not be able to serve in the next couple of years, they might want to know because the board service, might span a period of like 3 years or so. So there's questions that you can ask, you should ask actually. So, these interview process, it's just like for a job, it's a two-way street. So you need to be interviewing your interviewer, making sure that these positions are appropriate for you and that you want to do this and that they're coherent as a board. Not all boards are equal and sometimes they're, a little bit sketchy. So you need to get this out there. You got to understand their history, structure, staff, their geographical reach. Are they just in your city or are they national or are they international as a board? What's their impact that they're making? What difference are they actually doing? And what's the turnover of your staff? Have you had any staff leave recently? New staff joining? What are the board members leaving too? If there's a lot of turnover, that could be a red flag. What are your growth plans for the next few years? Are you planning on growing this internationally or nationally? What's your time commitment? How often do you meet in person? And then I think it's really important to always like ask for references as well. So ask for some references of maybe if they cover and target students, talk to some of the students that they talk to, or maybe references other board members or previous board members. So you can ask them some questions there too, and that way you get a better sense of who they are. I have a lot of questions, and I think I'm just I don't know if you can tell, I work in the hedge fund industry, and I'm used to doing due diligence and talking to investors. So these are the questions I tend to ask our investors as well. Like, what do you like most and least, about being on the board? You should definitely ask that to board members. Asking them like, how do you measure impact? Do you measure at all your impact that you're making on, on the homeless population, on the students, on whatever population you are targeting? Or decisions being made. If there's like one person who makes like 90% of the decisions on the board, that's usually red flag. The most ideal type of board, in my opinion, are boards that are a little bit flatter, where if you're joining, even on day one, you can immediately start to, get involved and to feel like you can make these important decisions as well on the board. So making sure that multiple people can make those decisions and take charge of different events is super important. Do you feel like the big board is too big or too small? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, we're way too big. That's a pretty big red flag. Or if they say they're too small, then you just have to get ready to do a lot more work. Describe the culture of the board. Those are really important. If they say they're flat, if they say they're very top down, hierarchical, those things are super important as well. In terms of other questions you can ask, this is my last page of questions. Is there any formal onboarding for new members? How long does it take before someone feels acquainted with things on the board? Ideally, it's a shorter onboarding process. Some boards do have, I remember one of the first boards I joined, because I was so young, I was like very, very young at the time. I had just graduated from college. And so they put me on a probationary period of, I think 3 months, where basically a trial period where we would try it out on the board, see if I liked it, if I liked the responsibilities, and then kind of go from there. And they would onboard me after the 3 months. Asking questions like, about budget, how many events you organize, because sometimes you would be in charge of organizing maybe a gala or a breakfast or a dinner event, or like multiple of them per year. How do you manage your events and inquiries and contacts? Do you have a management system where you can put all your contacts into, it doesn't matter if it's a shared Google Doc, a shared, spreadsheet, or do you use like a Salesforce? So understanding that is also super important. Sometimes they don't have any management system and it's super disorganized. Do you use any software like Slack or Google Docs, or do you text each other? How do you communicate with other board members? Very good questions. So the ideal board member, here's what usually the boards are looking for. They have someone who, has genuine interest in the organization and the cause, someone who has enough time to volunteer and organize events and to find sponsors, someone who, obviously has great communication and teamwork, but also is proactive in terms of reaching out to sponsors, proactive in reaching out to the other board members and saying, hey, let's do a dinner at some point, or let's get together, maybe not on a board level, but just as friends. And also someone who just kind of gets excited about meetings and, feels like the board position really excites them. I think those are some of the things that the ideal, board member, I think people kind of look for in that type of role. And if you have any questions, by the way, feel free to start asking. I will click on the ask questions and kind of take a look at that soon. Just quickly going through this as well, there are some red flags that I think are really important to be aware of. So there are some boards where you notice there are people who just kind of do it only for their resume, where, they're not really contributing. They maybe show up to like one or two events, but they don't like actually help out behind the scenes of the event. They don't organize the event. They're clearly just there to kind of reap the benefits. So be really, really careful of those, because the board needs to have a way of getting rid of those people. And so the other one that I have noticed from personal experience as well is having, boards with what we call kind of overly controlling leaders who they micromanage and they want to control every aspect of everything. What I mean by that is, like, for instance, there are some boards I'm on where we get inquiries from clients, inquiries from beneficiaries of, the nonprofit organization. And they'll email us, and one of the board leaders will be like, okay, none of you guys are allowed to answer emails. Only I'm allowed to, answer emails. And that's overly controlling. And, you don't want a board like that. You want it to be that they can trust you to have some authority, to have, be able to answer emails. Like, come on. So things like that, is definitely something that's really important. The other red flag I've seen a lot is like disorganized leaders of the board, where, and this is something true, if you're scheduling coffee meetings and dinners, with these boards to try to potentially join a board, if they keep on rescheduling with you, if they forget their meetings, or they, if the scheduling is a giant mess, or they can't even figure out how to schedule a meeting with you, chances are that's a big red flag as well, because, it shows as a board, if you're chair of the board, or if you're, in charge, if you're the CEO or the president of this nonprofit organization, you need to be able to schedule meetings pretty efficiently. If there's one person who's doing all the work as well, that's a big red flag, as well as if there's some people who are doing no work at all. So those are some of the big ones. A couple other ones: lack of transparency into their budget. If you ask them, you should be able to ask them, how big are you? What's your budget? Do you have $1 million budget, or do you have $100,000 budget, or do you have a $10 million budget? And if they don't tell you, if they're too scared to reveal that kind of information, that could be a huge red flag as well. If there is no formal vetting process into the board, so if they're not voting for you to join, if they're just asking like, oh, please join the board, that could be a red flag. And then ultimately, I think just use your gut instinct on these types of things. Rely on your gut to just be like, okay, here's what, it just feels wrong sometimes, and that's okay. It's okay to say no to these positions. So I do have a last couple. I'm actually almost done. Wow, almost done with my presentation. So as a couple of resources, there's a couple of websites, at least in the US, I think that could be helpful. So there's one organization called boardassist.org or BoardSource. Those are both nonprofits, which I love. I didn't want to list any for-profits because you can Google those yourself, and every country has them too. I'm a part of an organization called 100 Women in Finance, and we do have a nonprofit board committee whose job is to basically play matchmaker and help their members join nonprofits. I think on the committee, actually, what's funny is we actually have more nonprofits reach out to us than actual members who want to join. So it's actually relatively, we've had a lot of success, I guess, in pairing the few members who do reach out and want to join. And so definitely look up different websites, Google it, figure out kind of what it means, do some research there. So as a quick summary as well, it's never too early or too late to join a nonprofit board. Whatever, however old or young you are, whatever stage you're in your career, whatever, however big or small your wallet may be at this time as well. I think there's always some way to kind of give back and make an impact and to raise money, out there. You can always do some research, ask questions, make a careful decision about these types of positions, because it is a time commitment sometimes. They might meet monthly or yearly or weekly. So be really careful about that. And the biggest thing is, like, it is okay to say no. Don't forget that, you can, if they offer you to join a board and if it just feels wrong, you're welcome to say no, or to even say no after you've joined, after maybe it's been a year and you're like, hey, it's not the right time for me anymore. My stage, I'm at a different stage of my career now. I need to step off. That's totally okay. And no one's going to judge you for it. And hopefully it'll still have been great, while you experienced it. So that's about it. I think that's the end of my presentation. So just a couple of other quick things. You're welcome to, if you want to keep in touch with me, if you have other questions as well. I do prefer LinkedIn as a method of communication. LinkedIn or Twitter actually would be preferable. I do not answer my emails, especially my work is just way too busy. So I only, do emails for my day job. So LinkedIn would be better. You can just find me there. So maybe what I'll do now is I'm going to go back to my regular, let's see, how do I do this? I'm going to exit out of this window. I'm going to do that. You can see my face again. And there you go. Do you want me to answer some questions?
Yeah. So first of all, Christina, thank you very much. Covered a lot of information, all very, very good and educational. A lot of resources in there. And I'll just, because one of the questions asked had to do with resources and your slide deck. I know for the folks out there who are watching, we are recording this session. But Christina, are these slides going to be available, or are these proprietary? Can these be made public?
Yeah, so these are unfortunately proprietary, but what I can do is I can copy paste stuff for you guys. So if you want to see like the resources slide, definitely let me know. I will copy paste all of those for you. Hopefully it'll be helpful. And also if you want to, you can Google some of these organizations too, and just do some searches and, yourself. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So that takes care of that. Let's go. If it's okay, I have some questions myself, and I'm looking at the questions that were asked. Thank you, audience, for asking questions. Continue to put them in the Ask a Question feature. We'll continue to answer as many as we can before the top of the hour. And Christina, you might have touched upon some of this throughout your presentation, so just elaborate on it, or some of this information may be new. But the first question I want to take from Jason. Thanks, Jason, for asking Christina, from her perspective, what does being on a nonprofit board allow you to do that is different from your job in either the private sector or academia?
That's a really great question. I guess it's, a lot of it is allowing us to kind of have control of, being able to take charge of some cause that I really care about. I think that's the biggest thing, is having a greater role in society for a cause that I care about that isn't my day job. Some people, I think there's no such thing as a day job that we like 100% of the time. Many of us work in finance or tech or healthcare, which is all awesome. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to make a difference in an organization that I care about, whether that's giving back to my school, giving back to my community in a different way. So I think that's definitely really big. The other thing is actually I have used my nonprofit board position as leverage sometimes in really difficult, when I'm raising funding for my company or for a startup, for instance. I'll be like, oh, by the way, I'm on the board of, this organization, and we host events for the community, and I want to invite you to our annual breakfast event, and they're like, oh, that's really cool, so it allows you to kind of connect with different people as well. I think the benefits are it's just such a great benefit, and the time commitment is so minimal, compared to the people you get to meet and, the difference you kind of get to make out there. So I think that's definitely the big part is, there's a lot of different benefits.
Yeah, so personal fulfillment is the first thing, right? You want to be personally fulfilled if you join a board. But to your second point, and this is part of what leads into my first question, because I'm on a board, I do the same thing. If I have a question at work, or I'm up against a challenge on a project, or I'm dealing with something, professionally, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, let me leverage the board that I'm a member of and see if maybe they can help me solve a problem, or provide a solution to a particular problem. So I think that's great advice.
100%. That I've done that too, actually, where I'll look at. There's one example is the World Economic Forum. They have like their young, I forgot what it's called, like their youth council or some name for it. But one of the board members, another board member of another nonprofit I'm a part of, they reached out and they said, "Hey, Christina, you'd be perfect for this. Let me nominate you for this position." And I'm like, "Thank you." And it was just one of those things where they totally didn't have to do it, but they did. And so that network of just knowing people and from these different industries sometimes can be a huge, also the other benefit I forgot to mention is like, because sometimes people don't think about this, but I'm friends with a lot of board members. Some of my closest friends now are other board members. And it's funny because sometimes they're, they might be twice my age, but we're such good friends. We grab coffee, sometimes like on a weekly basis, when we want to chat and we want to rant about work. I love that you get that privilege of meeting people from different generations, and being friends with them, I think, is also a huge benefit.
There you go. So it also creates relationships. That's awesome. Yeah. So I have a question sort of from my perspective, and you may have alluded to this in your red flag slide when you were going over red flags, but what if you're on a smaller board and there's a few, maybe one or two stronger personalities on that board or very opinionated people, and you're finding it very difficult for your voice to be heard within a conversation? How would you suggest dealing with that? Like either alpha males or alpha females or really strong opinionated people that sort of take over the conversation in a board meeting?
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of stuff, like, just needs to be changed either at the roots level in terms of like talking to the nomination committee and being like, "Hey, by the way," they probably notice it too. Everyone notices, these one or two people they're talking 90% of the board meetings. It's just them talking, right? That could be an issue. So bringing it up in front of the the nomination and governance committee who can give them that feedback anonymously can be helpful as well. So there are other board members who are there to kind of help out and to make sure that your concerns are being heard and that they, are being delivered to the right people anonymously, ideally, unless you want to deliver it in person and tell them. And so sometimes I have done some things as well in person where people will be like, "What did I do wrong?" Right? And so maybe I'll schedule a coffee or meeting with them, and you can give them feedback. And I think the biggest tips on feedback is just you state the facts and you say how it made you feel, right? So the facts are like, the fact is, this last board meeting, you were talking over, 80-90% of the time. It was just mostly you talking, right? And they'll probably be like, "Yeah, I wish there were more people talking." They'll probably tell you that. And then you'd be like, "Yeah, like, next time maybe, I'll try to be more involved next time. But, also make sure if you give people the chance to ask questions and talk, that would be good." So just framing it in a way like that definitely helps, in meeting with them. Just giving that feedback is super important.
Excellent. Great advice. Okay. Let's go. Next question from Jennifer. Jennifer L. Thanks, Jennifer, for asking Christina. Do you have any tips on fundraising?
Yeah. A lot of boards actually will help you with the fundraising, which is great. So their members will send you a fundraising template and, for like whatever event you need to fundraise for. So a lot of times the fundraising isn't just general fundraising. It's mainly maybe it's for a gala or for a breakfast or for some other, special event that they're doing. And so you send this invitation, and it'll actually give you the sponsorship packet. It'll tell you how to word it and stuff like that. In general, my general advice is just, telling a personal story of like, here's why I give, and here's why it's important to me. And so then that way, in your emails and stuff like that, you can kind of have that there. What I did for my fundraising events, I would actually send out an email blast. I have a mailing list, and I put on the mailing list, I say 2 emails per year, and that's it. And so they know, they don't think it's spam. But I'll send those 2 emails per year. One being for one event in the fall, one being for an event in the spring. And I'll be like, "Here's my one ask for you is just you donate, or you ask your company, every company has a donation budget, especially large companies like accounting firms or financial firms. They have these giant pools of money every year that they have even full-time employees where their job is to allocate that money to various nonprofits. And so you talk to them and you kind of reach them and say like, "Hey, here, what's your budget for this year? And can you allocate some to this cause because it's an awesome, for these reasons, whatever reasons you feel like." So that also hopefully gives you some context as well.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And I actually had a similar experience recently at my job where we were looking for fundraising and sponsorships and partnership dollars for a particular project here at my company. And keep in mind when you're doing some of that outreach, budgets for the next fiscal year are created like at the end of the previous year. So timing is important too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, timing is important. Some of these, they might have, fiscal year that ends in June. So they may be, commence their new board services in June, some of them at the end of the year. So yeah, it just depends. But yeah, sometimes you're right, just keeping that in mind is important too.
So another question from, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Alicia. So Alicia asks, how did you know, Christina, that you were ready to join a nonprofit board? And similarly, how did you know you wanted to join additional boards after the first one?
To be honest, I wasn't. I thought I was unprepared, but the thing is actually the first board, they just wanted me to join. They were like, hey, you've been to our events and we want you on the board. And I was like, are you sure? Because my work is so busy. And, I gave him a bunch of excuses. Like, I am so busy at work. I don't even know how to handle my own life. So how do I handle the lives of many other people? I don't know. What if I had so many concerns, like, what if socially I don't get along with the other board members who are mostly white men? What if socially I'm different? What if? And they were like, don't worry about it. Just join and, see what happens. And so I joined, and it turned out to be like the best experience ever. And I became like really good friends with socially. I had no issues at all. I thought all the board members, they were so close knit and stuff. And then they invited me right into the group. I felt totally great. And it was really surprising. Like, it turned out to be a fantastic experience. So I thought, there really wasn't any good timing. It was just kind of like I got thrown into it. And then after that, I realized, wait, this is super rewarding. Why don't I be more proactive about looking for organizations and causes I care about, and then going from there. And then it just kind of went on and on. I think usually what happens with sometimes is like, once you join like one board, then you have some experience and then you're like, oh, I want to continue joining more and more. And I see in the comments, someone said there's, they have a nonprofit that they want to join the board. So there's so many opportunities out there, and it's never too early or too late. You kind of just go with your gut feeling like, this sounds like fun and it sounds like I'll learn something. So I might as well join it. Sometimes the term is only for 2 years. So if you're worried about like a lifelong commitment, you can be like, it's just for 2 years. And then I can decide what I want to do next. So, all those things are good to consider. I was definitely very young at the time. I was worried about how much I had to raise, how much I had to donate. But they were like, don't worry about it, and I was like, okay, you're right. I can definitely raise this amount from a company and go from there. So all those things I think contributed to that ultimate decision.
Yeah, and all great points, Christina. And Alicia, to just piggyback off that, when I was asked to join my first board, it was sort of a reactive approach. I didn't seek it out. I didn't even know I was ready. And when they asked me, I was like, are you sure you got the right guy? Like, I don't even know what to do. I don't know how to participate. I don't know, what my involvement's going to be. And just like Christina said, they were just like, come on, like, just do it. We wouldn't have reached out to you if you weren't, strongly considered or qualified. And so I did it. And I just kind of jumped in, like, head first. And so I guess the ultimate answer is you don't really know if and when you're ready. Just do it if the opportunity lends itself. So you just mentioned something I want to touch upon, excuse me, and you alluded to this in your presentation, Christina, but leaving a board, right? So I actually serve on a board without a finite term. I think originally it was structured as 2 years, but it was sort of a soft 2 years. In other words, there's no hard, stop date. So how do you leave a position if you're serving on a board where there's no real end date? And you mentioned that this was okay to do, but sort of how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, it is a really difficult conversation. And I think one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had was when I wanted to leave a board that I was a really big part of actually initially. And for me, I'll tell you first, the reasons why I wanted to leave was just because I felt like the direction the board, the direction the organization was going towards was not the direction that I wanted to personally go down. It's just a difference in like direction. And so I was, in terms of framing it and how I ended up like contacting them, it's really relatively simple. Like I first, you can either meet with them and just tell them, hey, I'm at a different stage in my career now, and I'm just looking to, it's about time. It's, you mentioned a 2-year term and the 2 years are up, and I think I'm probably going to end up, just leaving at this point in time. And that's totally fine. No one's going to take it personally. Everyone is volunteering, everyone. So no one's going to be offended if you decide not to volunteer anymore. It's everyone understands. reasons. And we've had people leave boards. I've been on boards where people leave before me, where they leave for all kinds of reasons. Like they might leave because they're moving, or because they just don't want to be a part of it anymore, or because their work is extremely busy, and that's totally okay. There's no such thing as a bad reason, really. I've had people leave because they felt like the board was too big or too small. Totally fine as well. So, when I left as well, it was a really tough decision, or very difficult decision for me. But then I just sent them an email and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, I gotta leave. I just wanted to put this down on paper, write it down that I have to, leave the organization. I didn't really give any specific reason in terms of differences in paths. And so I told them if they want to know why, I'm happy to schedule a call with them. But that was about it. I was like, okay, I'm done, and that's about it. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately serving on a board is volunteership, right? You're not, it's not a job, it's not employment. So although it could be an uncomfortable situation to be put in, or a conversation to be had, I don't think anyone's going to, look down upon you for saying, I have to leave this board. I just either don't have the time anymore, or I just see myself going in a different direction. I do have one board that I'm on, believe it or not, Christina, that does have some requirements that have to be met to fulfill your board membership. And so make sure if you are on a board where you have to fulfill those requirements, you at least meet those requirements first before you drop off or you leave the board. So
yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Let's talk on, hi, Tina. Tina Richards-Lynn asks an advisory board question. So she's currently on an advisory board and attends the board meetings for a local animal rescue. Awesome. So what is your take, Christina, about the role of an advisory board?
Oh, it's great. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest difference between joining an advisory board and the actual board itself is that on the advisory board, you get to, offer advice, do a variety of different things, but you don't have to be, basically no one's going to look at you if you don't raise a lot of money for the board. You don't have the same kind of heavy responsibility sometimes that the full-time, board members have. And I think that's awesome. So I think when you're deciding between an advisory board and a full-time, or not full-time, but, a board, actual, board of trustees or whatever it may be, thinking about those things definitely makes a huge difference as well. I'm on a couple of advisory boards as well, where the commitment is a lot less. We may have 4 meetings per year. I'll be an observer, basically. I'll observe the meetings. I may not have any voting power or anything. I will still volunteer and help out at events and stuff. And so I think that is something I didn't touch upon, which is definitely if an organization is big enough that they have an advisory board, definitely you should consider those as well, because it is a great way to also start and to learn about what a board position entails. And then maybe from there, we do have some folks who transition between the two. So they might start on an advisory board, go and join the actual board for a couple of years, go back to the advisory board, so that there's people who kind of do both. And it just depends on the stage of your career and kind of what you feel like doing and how much time you have at that time. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'm on an advisory board myself, and the commitment is much less. I mean, we meet maybe 2 or 3 times a year. We do a Zoom meeting or something like that, and it's really just a catch-up call. So there's less of a commitment, I think, when you're on an advisory board. Okay, one more question, because we are approaching the top of the hour, and this one is, so my job or career is sort of shifting into a different industry. Should I stay on the same board that I'm currently on before I leave? How does that work? Because you're on a board that sort of relates to your current work, but now you're moving in a different direction. Do you owe it to that board to say, hey, this isn't for me anymore? Or do you think you could still stay on a board even though sort of your career is going in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on boards of, I guess, organizations that do things I have zero experience in. Whether that's education, obviously, is one big one. I don't have any, qualifications in that. So I think it is up to you. It's 100% your choice on whether or not you want to leave or stay. If you do plan on leaving, no matter what, then it's up to you on how you want to time it as well. What you think is best. You can let them know in advance, hey, I'm about to change careers. It's a great reason, and be like, hey, I'm about to step off. I just wanted to let you know in advance. For them, it's there's no real etiquette about this. I don't think so. You know how for companies you need to give, in America it's 2 weeks notice. In other countries it's a month notice. But for boards, really, I think just the earlier the better usually is what's preferred. So just telling them, hey, I need to step off the board at some point, just letting them know, or maybe you have a preferred date, or maybe you can say, I need to step off, even if it's in the middle of the year before their next meeting. That does happen sometimes, and that's okay. At the next meeting, they'll just make sure to announce it and to make sure to have a vote if that is what's required. So, but yeah, there's really no such thing as like right or wrong time. I think it's just up to you on when you want to announce it, if you want to.
Cool. Okay. Well, listen, this has been a jam-packed session with a lot of information. I hope everyone in the audience was as pleased with Christina's presentation as I was. I thought it was tremendous. I do want to take just a minute before people drop off the line to promote our session next week in the series. Next week, we have a panel, so it's going to be 4 women. They're all leaders of the IEEE Women in Engineering group. They've either chaired or been in a leadership role over the past few years within that group. And so they're going to come to the table. They're going to talk about STEM initiatives and things that they're doing with entrepreneurs in mind and millennials and young professionals as IEEE looks towards the future. It's going to be a great session. You do not have to be an IEEE member to join that session. It's for IEEE and non-IEEE members alike. So please join us. That's next Thursday, May 9th. It's at the same time, 11 o'clock Eastern time. And with that, I just want to thank Christina Qi for her time today and talking about nonprofit boards. And I'll wish everyone else on the line a good rest of your day. Thanks again, everybody.